Yes, I've got very little time, so I'll get through this very quickly. But first of all, we are funded primarily by the British Heart Foundation and Cancer Research UK. We also have received funding from the Department of Health to help support implementation of government strategy. We do not accept funding from the pharmaceutical industry, electronic cigarette companies, or certainly not from the tobacco companies. Although we do have a share in tobacco companies, so we can go and make trouble at their AGMs. So, what would a gateway effect look like? Well, established use in never smokers, established use across young people, growing use across young people, rising smoking rates, all of those things would lead us to concern. Is that what we're seeing? Well, no, I don't think it is. Our surveys on youth use, and this is not just our survey, so there's the ASH survey, but also other surveys from Wales, Scotland, the Smoking, Drinking and Drug Use Survey, which is England, and What About Youth, which is also England, PHE surveys, show very similar things, slightly different, but basically, ever tried, yes, there is experimentation, regular use, at least monthly, very little. And who are these young people who are using e-cigarettes? Well, they're regular smokers who tried e-cigarettes almost entirely. Never smokers who tried electronic cigarettes, small proportion. And I think also really important, regular use. So use at least monthly, and that's not daily use, just at least monthly in never smokers is so small that when you look at the confidence intervals, actually, it's hard to say how significant it is at all. Whereas amongst regular smokers, we are seeing some use. So the gateway effect and risky behaviour in young people. Well, anyone who's got or had teenage children like me, and many of you in the audience, I'm sure, know there's an established strong association between youth smoking and other risky behaviours. That's why when our children go out on a Saturday night, we worry about whether they're going to come home safely or not. But actually, the association between e-cigarette use and other behaviour is really quite strong. So it's not a surprise that children who use e-cigarettes may try smoking or do all sorts of other things. And actually, it doesn't really matter which one they do first, because they might try e-cigarette first and then go on to smoking. They might try smoking first and then go on to e-cigarettes. They're doing it because they engage in risky behaviour. And clearly there's an age gradient. I mean, our survey, and I haven't gone into great detail about how our survey's done, because I've only got 10 minutes, less than everyone else. I'm not quite sure why. But you can find it up on our website and more detail about the surveys and how they're done. But we cover 11 to 18-year-olds, and unsurprisingly, there's an age gradient. Which products are young people using first? Well, as I said, I don't think that's really that important, but actually mostly they're trying cigarettes before they use e-cigarettes. And the really key thing, I think, when it comes to a gateway, if we really were seeing a gateway effect, then the trend we've seen of declining smoking rates amongst 11 to 15-year-olds would not be continuing on a very similar gradient to the one it was previously. People have said to me, but maybe it would have been even faster if we hadn't had e-cigarettes. Well, maybe it would, and maybe it wouldn't, because there's not anything else going on that would make for a massive difference. Data from other countries. Well, there's a rapidly growing body of research, and actually we're seeing very similar patterns worldwide. There's one exception, and that's Poland, where there does seem to be much higher e-cigarette use, and I don't know why that is. But it's very difficult to do comparisons because, you know, there's all sorts of inconsistent measures and all the rest of it. And in addition, I have to say that many studies have been poorly reported. What they say, and when you actually look at the studies, what they actually say are not the same thing. And I think the United States is a particularly egregious example of this. The CDC study, which found that past 30-day use had increased, the press release didn't mention that cigarette smoking had continued to decline and was now at a 22-year low. Why? I don't know. Perhaps Americans in the audience could tell me. But if you look at this, then you can see very clearly that over the period of time, 2011 to 2014, cigarette use has gone down as e-cigarette use has gone up. Possible unintended consequences, and I think this is really important because people talk about unintended consequences all the time, and by and large they mean that by allowing e-cigarettes all sorts of dreadful things will happen. But actually, and this is not conclusive, it's one study, but a study in the US seems to show that in states where they have bans on e-cigarettes sale to under 18s, actually smoking rates are higher than they are in states where they don't have those bans. Now, I'm not saying that's conclusive, but all I'm saying is when you think about unintended consequences, don't just look in one direction. And to go back to the issue of perceptions of harm, and what we're seeing amongst adults, unsurprisingly, we're also seeing amongst children. I mean, the majority of young people do think that e-cigarettes are less harmful, but actually the proportion is going down, so from 74% to 67%. But those who think it's equally harmful or more harmful or don't know, it's actually going up. The don't know's gone down, but the more harmful's gone up a bit, equally harmful's gone up a bit too. I'm hoping that the PHE survey and reports will show when we do our next survey in March that actually that's been stopped, but it's not a good thing to see. So conclusions. As Linda said, so far we're not seeing evidence of a gateway effect in the UK. There's limited evidence from other jurisdictions. There's a possibility that over-regulation of e-cigarettes can have a negative impact on youth smoking uptake, and ongoing monitoring and surveillance is essential. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Deborah. I think you were given less time because we know you're such an effective advocate. You do the elevator pitch very, very frequently and very well indeed. So we've got time for questions. I'm looking for people who haven't actually spoken first, but if not, there's a question again from here.
Well, Deborah, I'll take you up on your challenge. I am an American in the audience, and I can explain, I think, CDC a little bit to you. CDC,
that was a rhetorical question.
I assume so, but nevertheless. I think CDC has a problem with the word cigarette, or the part of e-cigarette called cigarette. And I think CDC has adopted what I think is true internationally, in fact, that the anti-smoking campaign became an anti-tobacco campaign and is now an anti-nicotine campaign. And that the concepts and the differences between smoking, tobacco, and nicotine have gradually been lost as the folks opposed to e-cigarettes as a potential solution to the smoking problem are discovering that nicotine is a much broader category. And CDC is opposed to nicotine consumption in any form. And that we saw that in the review of the Swedish match application at FDA and on snus and elsewhere. So I think that's critical. And I think if we looked at the issue as more smoking harm reduction than tobacco harm reduction, we'd all be better off.
Okay, I mean, I think the key thing is that we have to remember what we're trying to do, those of us who are working in tobacco control, and what we really are trying to do is reduce the death, disease and disability caused by smoking. And nicotine addiction is a subsidiary issue, as is trying to destroy the tobacco industry.